access by a particular time. So, the 30% internet access that we've achieved could be largely in Lagos, Abuja, Port Harcourt, and Ibadan, and everyone else excluded. Perhaps the most disadvantaged populations who having access to that technology could make more impact or have more meaningful outcomes. So I think from the public sector, it's really a translation of, I don't want to say highfalutin policies into real actionable plans. And, we're doing some work in Cote d'Ivoire now, and I was in Abidjan last week, and we met the equivalent of a state governor and also the mayor of a city. And I was really amazed at how well they could articulate what we were doing and what they wanted the outcome to be for the people of their country. So, it's right from the minister, the state officials, and they took the time. And you could see that consistency in this is specifically what we want to achieve. Our schools to have internet. The common people, we have internet now, but we need broader access at this level for these people. And everyone was saying the same message. And that to us, it's just and they took the time, it was very different from what we see here. So in terms of policies, I think we have policies. I think it's really translating that into a coherent, prioritized set of actions that we can measure, that really impact people. Now, on the side of, NGOs, civic society, what can we do and what should we be doing? And we as business who are trying to deploy infrastructure, we go to the government all the time. Yes, we had an InfraCo license that we bid for in 2014. We got the license finally signed in 2016. This is 2019. We still don't have permits to implement, so different agencies of government. So even though we have a willingness to deploy infrastructure, we can't. We can't do it without the permit. So that's the whole thing about collaboration, cooperation. I think Dr. Ndukwe also mentioned it. Mrs. Udo mentioned it. We need to kind of take these things and say, who needs to do what? How does this all tie together? What is the priority? How are we going to get it done? I think that's what we require from the public sector, and it's not just one agency of government, it's across government. But where it translates for me to civic society and our responsibility as citizens is I notice in our public discourse, at the highest levels of our political discourse, the issue of access and digital transformation, the changing global economy, changing global value chains is not really in our public discourse. Anytime now I see a high government policy, I think the previous current administration is just coming to an end. There were issues of, they were doing test labs of where we were going to stimulate the economy. There's some consultant from Malaysia. You look at the ERGP and some of these plans. I'm always looking, where's ICT in the hierarchy? What are we saying about access of technology for our people? It's when we talk about infrastructure, talk about electricity, which is really critical, and we talk about transportation, I couldn't agree more. I don't see ICT infrastructure. If we have the roads and we have electricity in the 21st century, ICT is the biggest leveler that's going to give our youth access to information, to acquire knowledge, to empower themselves, to access global markets, to deliver services virtually, to generate economic outcomes. And I think our civil society needs to hold our leaders and put this more in the public domain. ICT in Nigeria, in our public discourse, is not ranking high enough. We celebrate a few of the successes and we make noise, but they're dots. It's just not enough. Our schools don't have access to internet. Our young people who don't have work, if you train them on these digital skills, there's so much empowerment it brings. I don't hear our leaders talking about that. I don't hear us in civil society saying, as young people, we're not globally competitive because we don't have this. I'm not hearing where, the alternative is to cross the Sahara or the Mediterranean. These young people, if they had digital skills, can be employed. We have case studies of people being employed, living in Nigeria, working in Nigeria, and earning, delivering services globally, because it's now a virtual world. We're just not making enough noise about it, and our leaders are not talking about it. When they talk about the top policy flanks, you hardly see ICT in there. How can in the 21st century? So I think civil society, we also have a responsibility. We talk about the rural areas here that are not being connected. You look at policy in the EU, in Canada, in the US, governments there is trying to support ensuring those people have access, because it may not be economically advantageous for businesses to deploy there. So they create the right incentives, or they tie it to granting privileges in more economically lucrative areas and make it a requirement for people to deploy and provide access in those areas. They give grants to supplement in those areas. What are we doing here? If those economies that have a lot more money have to do that, where are the programs here that ensure that our rural areas, we have the right structures, we have the right incentives, and all the operators are not just rushing to the lucrative areas, which is what we have. You can get good internet, reasonably good internet access in Lagos. You pay more for it, but most people in Lagos make higher incomes than people in the rural areas. How about those rural areas? How do we get them into this picture? So that's really the role that I see the different stakeholders playing. And private sector, it's debt, it's equity. You have to pay back the money if you're a responsible business person, and it's going to be sustainable. So they will go only to places where that money can be paid back. But they have to work, government has to work with private sector to say, these are our objectives. You're not just here to make money. We have a development objective as well. And how can we bring those things together to achieve specific results? And I think we're not doing enough of that across the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Funke. You've really stimulated the conversation even further with this talking about getting right incentives and also coordination. Again, I hear coordination throughout the panel. So Jane, you are also in private sector. What are your thoughts on this issue? How can we really get action for digital inclusion?
So I would take up from where Funke stopped. I would say that coordination or collaboration, like Moni said, works when everyone's interest is aligned. So when the government, the private sector, civil society, or the public, everyone's interest is aligned. That's where we see collaboration working. So I'll give two examples, and we can look at two of them and then compare. So I'll give an example of Ghana, where I worked for 4 years. I was an equipment supplier. So I was working with one of the large mobile operators, and it was clear, the government already had their policy. They were already implementing it the way they knew best, which was to provide digital inclusion. So they wanted to go to the rural areas. They had GIFEC, they had it all planned out. But we saw that they were building like 4 sites in a year. Think about it, just 4 sites in a year. And my customer was determined to grow the numbers. They could see what they could do, and it was the market that was actually responding. So we noticed basic things like mobile TV or IPTV. We thought, oh, it's just for the cities. But we noticed the rural guys were actually consuming the content. And especially those funny Venezuelan movies, when they do the voiceover in the local dialect, we see high consumptions. Things like mobile money was spreading fast. People were using it for all kinds of stuff. So they were now interested to go to that space. We sat down together, we put a business case, and we found out that the only way it could work, like she said, because they are commercially driven, is if we reduce the cost. Our standard business models will not work. So we made it as lean as we could make it, but we realized that the only way to keep going on was to get the government included. So we went to them and we told them, the only way this could work is if we could only fund the equipment. In terms of site acquisition, permits, custom clearance. We had to drop all that cost to make it work. But back to what I said about collaboration works when everybody's interest is aligned. So for the equipment vendor, they wanted market share. For the mobile operators, he wanted to reach unreached areas because he needed the volumes to drive his products. And in doing that, he was going to get digital inclusion as well. He was going to provide financial inclusion for those in the rural areas. And of course, we sold it to the government. They needed leverage. They wanted to show their people that they were doing something to support the policies they'd put in together. And there we were. In 3 months, we rolled out 50 sites. And the aim was to do 100 sites a year, compared to an average of 5 sites. Now, I think what made that sustainable, what made that work was the fact that all interests were aligned, everybody's agenda was being met, and the fact that everybody was coming with their strengths. Because it's possible it wouldn't have been sustainable. I'll give the case of another project we ran in Tanzania, which seems to be falling apart. 1,000 schools, rural schools in rural areas. We're working with the government and working with funding partners for Europe. But as I'm talking to you, that project will probably shut down. Why? It's not sustainable. After the 18 months where the donor fund had, dried up, the government is not willing to bring any funds, then the thing is falling apart because it's also not commercially driven. So what we realized, two things. Apart from all interests being aligned, it's also important that everybody comes with their strengths. We know that governments are, not to sound negative, money is here, but they're not sometimes good at creating sustainability of this in terms of implementing their policies. And we know people in the private sector, because they're commercially driven, are more driven to create sustainable projects, because you want a project that can sustain itself. You want to implement it in a way that is win-win for everyone, and it can still run on its own. So I think that's one of the biggest cases we had with the Tanzania scenario, was the fact that it's not sustainable. Now, all the parties are just thinking maybe we have to shut this thing down because nobody's willing to pay because of the way it's been launched. The users themselves did not, some of the users are even going ahead to contribute to, kind of fund to sustain it. But we know because we hadn't thought about that in delivering that implementation, there's no way we can sustain that volume. So in summary, that's what I'm saying. If all parties are always aligned, if everybody's shared interest, there's a common, everybody's agenda is being met, then you see that implementation works.
Thank you very much, Jane. So I'll come to the audience now. You've heard the opening remarks. I'd like to hear from you. You've come from various countries. How do you get policymakers to act in your various countries? What has worked in your countries? Maybe you can talk about a policy and an action that followed, and maybe a role that you played in it. So the floor is open now. Let me see the hands up, then I would know how to manage my time. So 1. Okay.
There's 1,
2, 3, 4, 5. So we'll start with the first 5. Yes. Please mention the organization you're from and then go straight. Can we have a mic here, please?
Good morning, everyone. Tijani Bamdele, representing LAPO, Lift Above Poverty Organization. For me, it's not actually what is working now I want to talk about. It's what the problem I think I'm facing in my organization, and several other persons are facing it, I believe. There are 2 things that always throw in the air. When you're in IT and everything is working smoothly, it's working fine, they'll ask you, why do I need to pay an IT? And when everything collapses sometime in a day, just fall down, they say, why am I paying you? Why are you there? So the question is 2 ways. Why are you there when it's working? Why are you there when it's not working? I see one problem most of the time. When you recommend something that it's going to help the organization, going to help the community, it's pushed beyond your level. Okay, I make a recommendation to my head of department. He push it to the director. Director push it within a management meeting and they push it to the board. When it gets to the board, I'm not there to defend it. My manager is not there to defend it. And within the board, there's no any IT guy there or an IT inclined person, they look at it and they look at the financial implication. Man, why do we need to spend this much on IT? Why? What? Please let it be. They just dump it there. It died naturally. But if, for example, there's an IT person in that board meeting or as one of the board members, if we know the reason for this thing, we need it. It has to fly. It has to work. So I think maybe we can, or I will ask Mr. Sheshan to please, if there's a way he can push it into policy, for every organization, in as far you are in Nigeria, you have something to do with IT, your board should have an IT expert as one of your board members, at least one. I raised the same issue in NCS conference in July last year. At least let it be a policy. It's a must. We have other people there. Finance, it fly when it comes to other issues, risk management, they are all there. But when it comes to IT, I observe there is not always an IT person there in that board. And it's a key area.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So you're talking about having buy-in at the highest level,
Yes.
ensuring that there's representation on digital issues. All right. So there was a hand up over there. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm Avis Momeni from Cameroon. I will better express myself in French, please. Alors, tout à l'heure, j'ai entendu les intervenants interpeller la société civile. Je voudrais tout simplement partager avec les intervenants et les participants dans la salle de l'initiative qui a été faite par la société civile africaine pour mettre sur pied un document, n'est-ce pas, intitulé la Déclaration africaine des droits et libertés de l'Internet, et qui a été adopté en Gambie en 2016 par la Commission africaine des droits et libertés, par la Commission africaine des droits des peuples et de l'homme, et qui interpelle désormais tous les États africains à s'inspirer de ce document, comme un document, n'est-ce pas, qui aide les politiques. Il est désormais question que chaque État qui met en place des politiques relatives à l'Internet se rassure qu'effectivement les principes qui sont inclus dans ce document sont pris en compte dans l'élaboration des politiques de l'Internet. Je me réjouis qu'il y a une session qui aura lieu demain, je crois, organisée par APC, et qui va parler largement, n'est-ce pas, des initiatives qui sont faites dans le cadre de la mise en application de ces principes-là. Merci.
Thank you very much. My name is Prince Israel Reka. I work for Connected Advocacy based in Edo State. I want to just share some of the success story we were able to use in our state. We were part of this, the Not Too Young to Run bill. Our organization coordinated it in Edo State. We were able to use the internet and to reach out to the legislators, while we just like all the emails and hashtags of those representing our states on the need for them to say yes to the bill. And also with that, we now be sending text messages, sending them Facebook messages that your constituency wants you to say yes to the Not Too Young to Run bill. And many young persons took it up in our states. I'm pressuring them. They said, okay, if it's this you are asking for, we will just do. Since you're not going to take any money from my pocket, you say you should vote yes. And most of them begin to associate with it. Yes, I want to support young people to be included in decision making. And this was how they all voted a voice vote for the Not Too Young to Run bill. And also, I did the same thing in my state because we needed 24 states to say yes to that bill. And each state, young people were all in charge to ensure they reached out to those local assemblies to pass the bill. But it's only Lagos and one other state didn't pass it though. So, internet was a tool we used. Young people saying, this is our day for action. Young people need to be included in decision making. And as we were sending these text messages, sending them Facebook messages, tagging them on their Twitter handles, and the message became viral that everybody wants to like, oh, I'm part of the Not Too Young to Run team. I pushed the Not Too Young to Run bill. So the hashtag was like fire. Everybody wants to be associated with it. So, and the president couldn't even resist it because you see, if I say no to this bill, I think young people will really say, I say they are lazy. So for me to say, okay, they've done well, last year, May 31st, they passed the bill, and now it's now a law. So this was one of the things we've involved in that has also led to pushing for policy in Nigeria. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
Okay. Hello to everyone. I'm from Cameroon. I'm called Emilo. I first of all want to share an experience because I'm from university making research in ITC. And I wanted to talk about implementation of policies in ITC, how it is really difficult to get the right partners and to get people engaged into it. The example that I'm going to take is a very simple example that people don't care about it, especially here in Africa, and talking about Cameroon in particular, is identity of students in university. It's very important because I've been through internet, for example, for research, and I want to access international libraries. And they ask me from which institution I am. And they have all the information about institutions around the world, but they ask me to give my university identity access. And that's where I've noticed that, in fact, in universities, it doesn't exist. And there were one of the initiatives in one university of Yaoundé Toussoua, where I did my master's degree, for example, they have a very great initiative about ID cards for students, which were electronic. Students agreed to pay more fees to have those cards. That is almost 12,000 francs, and it is really huge when we know that some other people cannot even afford 50,000 francs a year to pay university, but people have paid it because they have the feeling to exist with those cards. And with the card, they were telling students that you will have access to many other digital services from the universities. That is, you can access your notes online. No need to come and check because they paste it outside under rain. If it has rained, they have pasted it. You cannot read your notes. And if a friend have not registered it, you may go to the administrative and there they will not give it to you because they will say they will not look for it for only one person. So the initiative was very great. But then after almost 5 or 10 years now, we still don't have those cards. It doesn't exist anymore. Students don't have identities. And now we are trying to ask, to whom do we have to talk to? Is it the administration? Because there people think that as it is the administration that introduce the initiatives and they are the one who have stopped it, maybe they don't have any accountability. So right here it is accountability issues in implementation of those policies. And then my question is that what is the best way in implementation? Is it a top-down, a bottom-top? And I thank you for that.
Great questions. I think one last, there's a lady behind her. So after that, we'll just come to the panel and then we'll throw the next set of questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gift, and I currently work as a Google Policy Fellow with Ventures Platform in Abuja. I have a question, but before I go straight to my question, I'd like to share, my work with regards to digital inclusion. So sometime early this month, I planned a project. It's called an Ecosystem Dialogue Series, where we have tech stakeholders, government stakeholders get to talk about policies and how can we advocate for policies to drive, a more enabling environment for technology to thrive in Nigeria. And one of the key policy focal areas we decided to focus on was on infrastructure. So when Mrs. Funke was mentioning, quite a number of things as regards infrastructure, I was really interested in what she was saying. And we did a survey where we have tech hub managers, share their views on what is their major pain points in the tech ecosystem. And internet kept reoccurring. Unaffordable internet, unaccessible internet, it just kept reoccurring, despite the fact that they mentioned electricity and rent, but internet was the major key pain points that they had. And from the research I came across, I found out that the NCC had a policy, the right-of-way charges, which it was harmonized, I think, sometime last year, where if you want to lay fiber optic in different states in Nigeria, you have to pay 145 naira as opposed to the 4,000 naira. And while I was making that research, I came across the fact that most states are yet to, implement these said policies. And my research led me to the work done by Main One, like a collaboration as well with CC Hub, and how Main One, ensured that CC Hub had access to internet. And it just kept, I just kept asking myself questions that why, NCC came across with the harmonized charges, why are state governments not, implementing it? What could be the issue? And it all boils down to how can we drive more policy implementation, because we can continue to talk about these are the ideas we have, this is what we want to achieve, but how can we ensure that, it comes to life? Thank you so much.
Thank you for those great questions. So we'll just come back to the panel really briefly. If anyone wants to make an interjection on or respond to any of the issues that was raised. There was getting buy-in for digital issues at the highest level in organizations, whether that can be put into law. There was a very good example of grassroots mobilization of a way of getting policy into action. And then the question about there's digital exclusion at university level because of identity issues. How can that be addressed? And there was a question about what's the best way for implementation. And then, of course, a shout out that was given out to Winwan at the end. So, yeah, feel free to Funke.
Yes, I think one of the common threads I see here is really the role that we all play as citizens of our various countries and civil society to have a louder voice in making our leaders aware of the importance of ICT in the 21st century and the global economy. I think it runs through the first one, which was about boards should have IT representation. If businesses are serious, if they want to be competitive, they need to be thinking about IT. I think Edo State, where grassroots and civil society is having some impact, is actually affecting the government there, because Edo State is a state where last year the governor invited us to partner, and we're just completing now the deployment of a network across Metro Benin, which as part of granting us right of way at the statutory rate, we're also throwing in connectivity across the Edo Jobs facility and major institutions, the tech institutes and the tech hubs that the government is supporting within the state capital as part of that project. So it does show that civil society engagement and the progressiveness of that state government is actually translating into policy implementation and results. And we can't say that everywhere across the country. For the university and the issue of identity management, I absolutely agree with you. I think we have similar issues in Nigeria. I think African individuals and institutions need to be online, and our identities need to be registered online. In this new virtual world, everything from access to services, criminal activity, law enforcement, security, people need to have digital security and digital identities, otherwise you're really not kind of recognized to the rest of the world. Most of our countries do have policies and agencies in this regard, but implementation is still lagging. You mentioned, is it a top-down or a bottoms-up approach? I think it needs to be both, and I think we need to be a lot more vocal, bottoms up. In Nigeria, we have NIMSI, we have SIM card registration, we have BVN, we have tax TIN, we have driver's license. These are not harmonized, and they're not really being put to effective use for access to services, other than that specific service that each one was registered for. In advanced economies, you have one number, be it your social security number or your tax ID, which cuts across various services, and based on that, you're able to access both private and public services. Universities, the initiatives, there's WACRAN, West African Research and Engineering Network, which is trying to connect all the universities, ensure our educational institutions have are registered on the internet, have their national research and engineering networks, where they're registered with proper educational domains, so that members of those institutions can get access to some of the free educational resources available online. But when our institutions are not registered online, then members of those communities, those academic institutions cannot get access to those facilities. And I think, thank you. I think there's main one as a business, but we're also citizens, and we try to do this advocacy, and civil society needs to kind of make more noise that these policies need to be implemented, and when they're actually implemented, they work.
So yeah, Funk has said exactly what would apply to the question that you raised, but we have to be very aware that in appreciating and deploying technology, whether in civil society or business for efficiency and competitiveness or any other economic gains, it must uphold human rights. So data that's collected as part of the various exercises that you've mentioned should be collected in an ethical way. Users should be protected. Breaches the mechanisms in place should ensure that the data is protected from breaches, and that the data subjects are able to access the data that's held for them and update it where it's wrong. Specifically for civil society, if we're pushing for inclusion or non-discrimination or any other human rights work, our appreciation of technology in that role should remain aware of the need for safety and security online. So use of encryption technologies, use of circumvention techniques in countries or areas that put civil society or actors at risk. What Avis mentioned around the Africa Declaration, that's a very good tool for advocacy, and in a lot of what he said, since its launch in 2016, getting more African countries to recognize what the declaration provides for and incorporating that in their local legislation is important. The declaration doesn't just focus on access or affordability or access to information. It also covers issues of privacy and non-discrimination, again, when we're talking about inclusion. Regarding the issue on Cameroon, so access to technology and resources, again, as we push for digital inclusion and human rights online, and trying to ensure that many communities and constituencies are accessing the internet for improved livelihoods or governance and the like, we must ensure that there is relevant content. So that's local content. It should be in local languages. there's no use getting everyone online and the content there is not relevant to myself or my grandmother or anyone else. So that content should be specific to African contexts. For civil society, I think the onus is on us to make sure that we're documenting more and raising awareness more. The lack of research or the barriers that you mentioned, that research, of course, is from the West, so there should be more research, multi-methods research that's coming off the continent and about the continent and available to academia to either complement that research or inform, like has been mentioned earlier on, inform advocacy efforts or collaboration initiatives and design of government interventions.
So just we're running out of time, so I think we just come to the closing comments. With you, Jane, do you have in a minute, tell us what key action we need to take now to make sure that we're able to close the digital divide, and everyone else, just a minute. Yeah.
Okay, so I would have loved to answer. Let me just round up by responding to what he said about, is it really key that we should have people in ICT in the board? I'm not too sure if we should do that, but I will re-echo what Funke said. It's important that the country sees as a priority. We know that when governments declare things as priority, the private sector takes it up, the civil societies, everybody takes it and everybody wants to drive it. And it becomes natural. You know, we're talking about the fourth industrial revolution and how there will be digital transformation disrupting all the different industries. It becomes clear that ICT will become a basic skill. So I don't think we cannot run away. It's a global village. There's no hiding. It will be a basic skill. So it's better we jump on the bandwagon and start doing stuff. And to what she said, maybe I'll use that as my closing remark, in terms of should the implementation of these policies be top-down or bottom-up. I think from my own exposure in working in the private sector, there's no hard and fast rule. It could be top down, it could be bottom up. It doesn't matter. And I also believe that it could be situational. So it could start from the top and somewhere in the middle along the implementation, the bottom takes over. Or it could start from the bottom and the top takes over. I think what has been key, what I would say, is the fact that every collaborator is coming with their strength and everybody's interest is actually addressed.
Yeah. Moni?
My closing remarks would be that, please, let common good be, the watchword for everyone, private, public, civil society, whoever you are. And in pushing implementation of government policies, I think that private sector who have the core competencies in the areas of implementing such policies should please study the policies, come up with, ideas in terms of projects, programs, initiatives, and bring that to government. Together, you look at which MDA is responsible for implementing what aspect of a particular policy and engage with them with the solutions that you have, the ideas that will make those things possible, budgets and all of that, and engage with the implementing agencies. Together, you can create the project, push it into the budget, defend it, and once that is done, because we do know that funding is a major constraint in getting some of these things out there. So do that in partnership with the implementing agencies, and then we'll be moving in the right direction. This has worked. Thank you.
Thank you, Moni. And I'll give the final remark to Dr. Ndukwe.
Thank you, Elena. I think it's been a great discussion. Though I was very anxious to catch this issue about moving policymakers into action, because we've spent a lot of time talking about the problems and not enough time talking about how to move policymakers into action. But I was able to pick one or two statements. And I want to say there is need to give the citizens voices in order to make sure that they can complain, they can move to a particular place and say, look, we need this. It was mentioned briefly, and I give you an example. When I was the EVC of NCC, we had a consumer department, and we had numbers which they could call to make complaints. And I noticed there was no call coming in. Maybe, I guess it was maybe because of the years of military regime that we had or something, or the fact that NITEL was the only provider at one time, and people were used to the bad service that was being created. That led us to what we call the consumer parliament, to give the citizens some voice to come out. So we were able to pull people out to come actually and talk about what their problems are. So there was something about the role of the civil societies here. They must not keep quiet. They must learn about the importance of ICTs and drum it as loudly as possible, and also identify state governments that are doing well and criticize those that are not doing well, and demand that certain things be done. I know that in this audience we don't just have Nigerians. I guess it's the same thing for other countries that are here present, that aspect of demanding what you think is right for you is very important, and not just accepting anything that happens and we take it that way. So my last point is on education. Internet is intertwined with education. You can make a phone call without ability to read and write. But if you have to operate on a digital platform, you must have basic skills of reading and writing, or at least using a keyboard. So the issue here is that as we're talking about digital inclusion, we must also be looking at what can improve educational facilities both for the elderly and for the young. Because in those days, we had education for matured people. That seems to be dying down a little bit. It's not as prevalent as it used to be some time ago. But this is the time, if we are talking about inclusiveness, if we are talking about my grandmother in the village, that grandmother better knows how to read something, whether in his native language or in English, and be able to even use a keyboard. And not to talk of our children, we are talking about teaching young people even coding from elementary school. And that is the kind of digital inclusion of the future we must be all aligned with, and be able to demand that government does what it's supposed to do. Like Funke said, you can be given a license. If the operating environment is not given, you can't actually do much. So we must demand that government does what it must do. Thank you very much.
I'd like to say thank you to all of you for participating, and a big round of applause for the panelists and for yourselves as well.
Thank you very much. The picture.
Okay.
Thank you very much. The next session is organized by Access Now, Internet Shutdown in 2019, Patterns, Trends, and Campaigning in the African Region. Room, front of. And the last is Freedom Online Coalition, organized by Freedom Online Coalition Open Forum. It is in Alvan, Ikoku. It is December out, please. Thank you.
Okay. IT people. Okay, I think I can hear myself now, so you all can hear me. Good afternoon. Is everybody here in the room? Okay, well, we can, I guess, just start. My name is Brahan Taye. This session is on internet shutdowns and trends and patterns in the African continent. And we'll be talking about some of the major issues that we've seen in the continent. What are the things that we've planned as Access Now, as the Keep It On Coalition? And then what are the things that we can plan for the next year? So I'll let my panelists first introduce themselves. We're missing one person, but hopefully he will join us soon. So Robert, we'll start with you. Introduce yourself, and then we can go from there.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Robert Muduri. I am a research fellow at the Strathmore Law School, where we have the Center for Intellectual Property and Information Technology. We are studying information controls as an ecosystem, and I'll talk more about that later.
Okay. My name is Emmanuel Vitus. I'm coming from Togo. I'm a Google Policy Fellow for Francophone Africa, and my host organization is ParadigmHQ. So we basically work on digital rights and freedom online. So we're trying to promote and also monitor everything related to digital violation and digital freedom in the Francophone Africa.
My name is Ndiaga. I'm coming from Senegal. I work for a civil society organization named Senegalese Association of ICT Users.
Perfect. Okay, so before we start the conversation, I just want to set the agenda for today. So in this room, it's also to check if everybody's with us. How many people have lived through an internet shutdown? Okay. Wow, that's not bad. That's not bad. Can I ask? So I see Koliwe over there, Zimbabwe. The lady over here in the front. Which country? Tunisia, of course. Yes. Which country? Come again? Uganda, Togo. Okay. Good. So we're amongst friends that have lived through these things. Yeah, so for 2019, we've had quite a difficult start. We've had shutdowns in Sudan, Algeria, Zimbabwe, Chad, DRC, Gabon, and there were some reports of a shutdown in Cameroon yesterday that we're still trying to confirm. if it was intentional. So we're definitely seeing a pattern in the African continent where internet is shut down. It did not, of course, start in 2018 or in 2017. It's been happening since the Arab Spring, but for now we're seeing an extended amount of time. For instance, DRC had shut down the internet for around 20 days during elections, protest, a coup attempt in Gabon. So these are some of the trends that we've seen as the Keep It On Coalition. And the reason why we wanted to have this conversation today with you all is not because you all have not either experienced shutdowns or know what internet shutdowns are, but we've identified some of the gaps that we are seeing as a coalition of 190 organizations in documenting, verifying, and circumventing internet shutdowns. And some of the things that we've seen is that there's definitely a lack of research in this space, especially with academics, within the academic space, trying to sort of figure out what are the patterns, trends, and how can we scientifically and statistically prove some of the things that we're seeing. This is the reason why we have Robert here, who's going to tell us a bit more about that. And then actual grassroots activism coverage is also something that we see. We want to educate journalists on how to cover internet shutdowns. We want them to be able to understand what shutdowns are. For instance, if you have noticed the situation in Sri Lanka and how social media platforms were shut down, there are a lot of US media that are reporting saying it's important, yes, it's good that Facebook and some social medias were shut down, but that's not really the case. And folks from the ground in Sri Lanka are actually suffering because social media has been shut down. And I think that's where Emmanuel comes in with his journalism background and now with his new fellowship covering Francophone Africa and much of Africa on shutdowns. And last but not least, I've saved the best. I think Senegal is a really great example that we can bring in. There were rumors that internet was going to be shut down in Senegal during 2 months, during February's election, and it wasn't shut down. And our friend from Ozitik is going to tell us why and how they did that. So I would let Robert start first with some of your research and work that you've done around this work.
Thank you, Berhan. I think what I can contribute from the research that we're doing is maybe the trends that we're seeing and maybe some of the observations that could help. I think there's more need for researchers to come into this space, but in what ways should they come? So the first thing that we noticed, I come from a country that hasn't yet shut down the internet, and I'm grateful for that, but that also makes it a bit more tricky to study internet shutdowns. And the fact that Kenya didn't shut down the internet in 2017, there was some discussion about that. There were still allegations of some, throttling, internet throttling, that's the reduction of the speed and things like that, and it was difficult to measure that. So we are trying to focus, working with people like Uni, on how can we develop more robust methodologies for actually detecting when the internet is being actively throttled, and especially in tension areas. So there's, let's say, a demonstration in town. You're not going to send a researcher with a Raspberry Pi to be in a hostile environment, but how can we develop methodologies that will be able to tell us a bit more about that? The other thing is that when you talk about definitions and the areas of research, it's a bit fragmented. There's people who are concerned with, let's say, legal measures, and that's why we're trying to focus more on information controls as an ecosystem. It's not just technical controls. There's regulatory controls. Within regulatory controls, you have things like taxation, social media tax in Kenya, in Uganda, excise duty in Kenya. We have to think about it more as an ecosystem, because then there's other things that come out that wouldn't be so easy to see when you're looking at it just from a fragmented position. The other thing that I would want to say is, especially where you don't have shutdowns, is the more the internet gets integrated into a community, the harder it is to just directly shut it down. But then we have to get deeper into what is it that, what other forms of control exist in that ecosystem. And this is where maybe corporates come in. So there's controls there that we have to look at, and we have to seek more transparency between the human rights end of organizations, because big corporates also have like a human rights angle and the business end of things. And these two areas have been identified to be working in silos and have to be brought together. And we need to kind of have research about how these areas currently operate and what can make them synergize and better present their work from a human rights perspective. The other thing that we did is notice election manipulation. That's fake news, disinformation, misinformation. We don't yet know, except let's say the Mueller report that came out last week in the US. That is probably the only comprehensive study of election manipulation that we've had. What other studies have been done, for instance, on Brexit and the Vote Leave campaign? What study was done about the allegations of Cambridge Analytica involved in Nigeria, in Kenya? This needs to be investigated, and we need researchers to come up into these areas. The other thing that I would say is, so you saw that with this manipulation, it wasn't more about controlling access to the internet, it was more about controlling the narrative that is already existing in the internet. And we've had the rise of fact-checking people. So there's Africa Check, there's Dubawa here, I think there's ZimFact, there's Pesa Check. There's a number of people getting into this space that want to do fact-checking. We need to be able to research how they can be helped and what other people currently, let's say, what synergies can we use with existing organizations. Reason, for instance, we know that Cambridge Analytica was involved in the 2016 elections in the US is that they have campaign laws that require them to disclose, for instance, what PAC is promoting a certain ad on TV and things like that. We don't have that here. We don't know who sponsored the apocalyptic videos that still exist in Kenya about Raila Odinga. And I think there was also one in Nigeria about Buhari or something like that. We need more transparency. That's not even a research issue. It's just more legal kind of angles, laws that actually control campaign financing and internet advertising. Thank you.
Yeah, you bring out a lot of the meat there. Maybe let Emmanuel take this on and tell us about your work and what you guys are doing in terms of looking at shutdowns in Francophone Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll start more on a personal level because I've been more journalist before joining all this. So I've worked on the online space for close to 7 years. So I was based in Ghana. So I was working with Ghana Web, which is Ghana's biggest online platform. And I was collaborating more freelance with Bloomberg, Reuters, and other media houses. So I think my first experience with internet shutdown came in the case of Togo, where the internet was shut down in August 2017. And then I got a call, Emmanuel, we need you quick in Lome, send us the stories, what's going on. The whole country was like in a total blackout. And I got to Lome, so I met a friend who came from UK. He was reporting for The Economist. He was in one of the best hotels in town. And funny enough, the hotel was having internet. So I was informing him that there's no internet in Togo. He was shocked, you know, because he was on Twitter, like looking at the trend, nothing is showing, like, so he got a shock and he's like, are you serious? Okay, let's have a walk. So as soon as we get out, there's no network. We try 1, 2, 3 hotels. From the 3-star, you get the internet, which was very interesting. And the diplomats, they were having their internet, the politicians are having their internet, but the citizens, you know, and all those activists planning for the protests and they don't have internet. So that's how the whole thing started. I got interested in to investigate what is going on, trying to call the government, the civil society, and engage with them to see what is going on. And the response was very simple. It was, okay, the internet is a threat to our national security. If we are going to have one of the biggest protests in our history and we let you guys expose all that to the world, what image are we promoting for our country? How do we encourage investors to come to the country? So they actually give, you know, their reasons. I was like, okay, fine. So if this is the case, let's see what will happen. So people start crossing the border, because for those who know, Togo is just a border. When I mean a border, is just fence that separate that separate the capital to Ghana. So it was very simple for people to just even stand with the fence and have your network and tweet. So it was very funny. You go to the border, you know, queues were there. Those who can go to Ghana, they just walk in. And as a journalist, you have to actually get your content, the videos of the protests, everything, cross the border, go to the other side and send it. So we still send the content they don't want us to send outside. So that was quite how I got the interest of engaging more in this, because we realized that the more we talk about it, the more the pressure comes. And I think 5 days later, the internet came back. So that was very good. Although we have a kind of permanent shutdown in Togo, I say it because it's always throttling, like, you know, the network is always throttling, but as Dr. just mentioned, it's very difficult to investigate because it's not shut down, but you can't use it. So that's the situation. So it's quite difficult. So Togo is not just an isolated case. I mentioned Togo because that was the experience of internet shutdown I faced personally in my life. But in Francophone Africa is actually a trend, because when you look at the political landscape in Francophone Africa, there are regimes, you know, who want to actually keep power. When you take Cameroon, which is 35 years in power. When you take Togo, 53 for one family. So Gabon, I think, is the same thing. Chad is the same thing. So it's mostly in those countries where we have the internet shutdowns. So Paradigm Initiative strategy, I joined them in 2018 when I was doing my conversion from journalism to, is it activism? Okay, let me put it that way. So journalism to activism, I joined Paradigm Initiative, and my job was mostly to focus on Francophone Africa, to look at those trends, to come out with mechanism how we can help the civil society, the technical community, the whole, I mean, the stakeholders in those countries, how we can accompany them to help them actually mitigate those internet shutdown, and also how we can engage with government, because it's very important as activists, as modern activists, if I can put it that way. We don't fight the government. I think we engage with them to understand their concerns and see how we can help them find solutions that can be durable, solutions that can help the citizens. So that is more the work we do at Paradigm Initiative. So it comes with different work, because it's not just engaging with the government, because if it's just a meeting, you know, you go in, you go out, and the conversation end there. So what we do is we actually try to, for example, 2019, we look at countries that have the possibility of shutting down the internet, or the countries that have the habit of shutting down the internet, how we can engage with them. So for example, in Cameroon, how we can engage with the government of Cameroon to actually prevent internet shutdown. And I think last year was a very good news, because Cameroon was able to organize an election without shutdown, although at a period of time they have kind of throttling, which was quite difficult to measure, but it was a very good news in Cameroon. But before that, a work was done. So Paradigm Initiative tried to organize capacity building workshop to actually sensitize all those stakeholders on the importance of keeping the internet at any time, the importance for the economy, the importance for the society. So that was what helped Cameroon actually to not shut down the internet during the October 2018 election. So it was the case in Senegal. In Senegal, we tried to engage with other coalitions like Keep It On, like the Network Coalition. So we tried to engage with them to actually come out with blog posts where we try to talk about the impact the tools PESA is actually offering us with net blocks to try to show the measurements in case of shutdown, how much will it cost to the economy. So we show those impacts to discourage the government and the stakeholders that are involved in shutting down the internet. So it's the same thing we're trying to do in Chad, because Chad has been out of the digital world, I think, close to a year now, or is a year already. The internet, I mean social media, not the internet, but social media platform have been shut down in Chad for 12 months. So we're trying to see how we can actually put the pressure on the government, because in those cases it's not just engagement, because when you engage at a certain level, you realize that, okay, this government doesn't listen. So you go forward on the hard way, which is something we are collaborating with other organizations like Access Now, like Internet Sans Frontières, to see how we can come out with petitions, how we can come out with a mechanism that will actually help lift the ban on social media in that country. So with election coming on in Guinea, election coming on in Benin, election coming on in Tunisia, there's still those fear of internet shutdown. So we try to actually prevent it by organized capacity building, by actually, as I said, coming out with campaigns, raise awareness to actually mitigate those shutdowns. So also overall, and I think that's one of the big projects, is to come out with legislations, because in Africa countries we don't have legislation that's back internet shutdowns, so the government can easily shut down the internet and walk away free. So I think we don't have institutions that can actually prevent the government from shutting down the internet. So we're trying now to come out with legislations